Thank you for joining me for the first of two videos reflecting on Thomas Keating's Divine Therapy and the False Self System. These were important parts of Keating's teachings on centering prayer, especially in the early years of his teachings. And they constitute his understanding of the spiritual and psychological effects and benefits of the practice of centering prayer. I'll begin by telling a story. It's a story I often tell in teaching and in preaching. In this story, there's a hiker hiking on his own in the mountaintops, and he's following a trail that leads along the edge of a steep cliff. And he trips and loses his footing and falls off the trail and down the face of this sheer cliff. Somehow, miraculously, he's able to grab hold of a branch that is growing from the side of the cliff, and he is hanging there for dear life. There's no way for him to climb back up, to regain the trail. There's no one to help him for miles around, and there's a sheer drop to certain death below him. And he hangs there desperately for some time until he begins to weaken. And then he lifts his face to heavens and he calls out and says, "I have never been a praying man, but if there is anyone up there, I need you now." And a voice comes from heaven. "Let go." And the man looks down, and then he looks back up, and he says, "Is there anyone else up there?" The story for me speaks of the difficulty we may find in letting go, which is the central aspect and benefit of centering prayer. And in this reflection, we'll talk a little about what that means to let go, and what it means when we hang on to those things in our life that will not, in the long run, serve us. Keating said the false self is created when we experience emotional trauma throughout our lives, as we experience wounding in areas of our core psychological needs. We develop attachments to people, places, and situations that bring us comfort, and aversions to people, places, and situations that lead to discomfort in the light of these wounds. This collection of attachments and aversions results in what Keating calls emotional programs for happiness. Through the lens of our emotional and psychological woundedness, when our needs are not met, we see a world of threat and scarcity. We are tempted to grasp after what we need or crave. We brace ourselves against rejection, and we seek to control person, places, and things around us. These temptations are the instruments of the creation and perpetuation of the false self system. And these temptations and their correspondence to our basic human needs can be illustrated in the familiar story of Jesus' experience of temptation in the wilderness. So I want to reflect on that story, and I'm going to use these three symbols, as you see, blue, green, and red, these different arrows within the circles, to illustrate the basic needs and the corresponding temptations. First of all, in the story, as we find it in the Gospel of Matthew, the first basic need, so identified by Thomas Keating, is our need for survival and security. This is basic. And we see this in Jesus' story. He's been fasting for 40 days and 40 nights. No doubt is hungry and at the point of some peril to his survival. At that moment, Satan comes to him to tempt him and saying, if you are the Son of God, command these stones to become loaves of bread. Get what you need. And this may seem very reasonable to us. I might do exactly that if I were in this position. It seems only natural that we would reach out to grasp after those things that we need for survival in the world. So when we face a threat in this basic need, a threat to our survival and security, this gives rise to the primary emotion of fear. Fear arises out of this kind of a threat. And in reaction to that fear, we form an attachment and to what will supply us with our security, what will bring us that happiness that we need. The temptation is to go beyond the simple supply of our needs and to grasp after some protection against that fear. The temptation is to materialism or to greed, and the emotional program of accumulation. This is what, when our basic need for survival and security is wounded, in reaction, we are tempted to a disordered relationship to this need, which leads to this emotional program of accumulation. The second basic need, as identified by Keating, is our need for affection and esteem, to be accepted, to be held, to be embraced by others. It's well known that a newborn child, if the child is not held, if it doesn't experience a physical embrace, it will fail to thrive. There's a threat there to our basic need for affection and esteem. And throughout our lives, we can experience a fear of rejection by others. So Jesus is presented with a temptation by Satan with this question: if you are the Son of God, so as to say, putting a question there, a doubt. Well, if you are, well, why not prove it? And Satan takes him to the pinnacle of the temple and tempts him to cast himself down, because if he is the Son of God, the angels will come and he will not, lest he dash his foot against a stone, they will save him. This will be a performance, a public demonstration, so that he could compel the acceptance, the adulation, the esteem of the crowd. And again, this seems like, well, why not? Why go through all the trouble of the cross and so on, if you could just perform this miraculous feat and so compel people's esteem. So this is the temptation when we face negligence or rejection or the loss of a relationship. The basic emotion that this brings up is grief, the sense of loss of connection and relationship. And in reaction to that grief, we are tempted to compel others to accept us by some performance or by some seduction, and this leads to an emotional program of happiness by exploiting or manipulating others in order to meet our emotional needs. We are actually using them to meet our needs, treating them as objects rather than as subjects. The next of our basic human needs is the need for power and control, the sense of putting ourselves, exerting ourselves in the world, asserting some kind of creativity for the sake of meaningful lives, to affect the world in a meaningful way that is expressive of who we are. In Jesus' case, the temptation to control is that temptation that Satan puts before him is global. He's taken to a mountaintop, shown all the kingdoms of the world, and the offer is, all these kingdoms I will give to you if you will bow down and worship me. Again, we might think, well, wouldn't the world be a wonderful place if Jesus was the king, if Jesus was in control? And that leads for many of us, if we are facing in our own lives some experience of having been frustrated in our desire for purpose in our lives, or we are repressed in our desire to express our creativity. This gives rise to the basic emotion of anger. Anger arises when some capacity is taken from us that ought to belong to us for the fullness of our self-realization. And the temptation there in the traditional language is one of excessive pride, to overly exert ourselves, overly assert ourselves in compensation for this sense of threat or oppression. The opposite is also possible. We might react in the opposite way, so that we may have an emotional program of domination, of exerting control over others and things around us beyond what's appropriate, or by retreating, by submitting, by refraining from asserting ourselves in an appropriate way. So to sum up here on what is, as it were, the negative side of this picture, the side of the temptations that give rise to these emotional programs for happiness that create the false self system. We have a basic need for security and survival. Where that's threatened or denied, it gives rise to the basic emotion of fear, temptations, to use traditional language of 7 deadly sins, gluttony and greed, that grasping after what we think we need, what we think will bring us happiness beyond the appropriate bounds of our genuine need. And this leads in the emotional program of happiness of accumulation. We can be happy if we just had more. And we can see how this becomes problematic, not only at the personal level, but at the societal level. We can see the effect on the world, on society, of people being driven to accumulate more than they genuinely need, to grasp after more than they genuinely need in this program of materialism. In the basic need for affection and esteem for human relationship, where human relationship is severed or broken, we experience the basic emotion of grief. And to protect ourselves against grief, to compel others to meet our need for relationship, our need for esteem, acceptance, and affection, this can manifest in, again, to use the language of the 7 deadly sins, lust and envy, where we are not at peace within ourselves and we are considering others as objects to meet our needs, or destabilizing ourselves by envying others and thinking that there's some esteem that is available to others that's not available to us, and so to be grasping after them in an emotional program of exploitation and using others as objects for our gratification. And we can see again how this manifests not only at the personal level, but at the societal, at the systemic level, systems of exploitations of folks that are considered as other or as less than, and not deserving to be treated as fully human in order to satisfy our needs and as a program for happiness. And finally, we have a legitimate need for empowerment, for a sense of our capability of bringing our natural gifts into the world in a way that's creative and productive, and brings about a satisfaction of our desire for meaning and purpose. And where that is taken from us, where that is denied or suppressed in us, it gives rise to a basic emotion of anger, which, if taken out of appropriate proportion, can create, in this traditional language, sins of rage or pride, overbearingness, or the opposite of sloth, of pulling back from the world, of so fearing to assert ourselves that we suppress ourselves, we internalize the oppression. And we can see how these programs of domination or submission can work out not only in our personal lives, but systemically, as the will to power distorts human relationships, distorts the political systems of nations, and relationships between nations. So, to review, the composite of our various emotional programs for happiness at the personal level determines patterns in our reactions to the world. These patterns determine our outward personality, that is, the self that we show to the world, how we show up in the world. We identify with this false self, thinking that this is who we really are. We tell ourselves a story about who we are. And this story determines the thoughts of our thinking mind. This is the stuff that goes through our minds automatically and involuntarily all through the day. As we consciously let go of our thoughts in centering prayer, we are relaxing our automatic, habitual identification with our programs for happiness, with the false self. And we begin to allow, with the release of this habitual, automatic, involuntary, unconscious identification with that false self, with those patterns of behavior, as we begin to let go. We, through the practice of centering prayer, through letting go, remember that the hiker on the mountain, letting go of these things in ourselves, these aspects of ourselves, these programs for happiness, it's not easy because we are inwardly convinced that these are exactly the things that that we depend on for our sense of safety, for our happiness, for our security in the world. And we're being asked in this practice to let go of these things which seem essential to our being. But as we do so, gently, in this practice, we gradually will find that we are less driven by our habitual temptations, more able to show up differently in the world, perhaps with more authenticity as our true self, that is, in our true identity as children of God. We will continue this reflection in part B of this series. Thank you for joining me.